Hello, and welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, 2023, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Google and Intopia, and our Gold supporters, Barrier Break and Tetralogical. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. You can also follow us on Mastodon, and if you have questions for the presenters, you can post them using the ID24 hashtag or post them in the YouTube chat for our Q&A at the end of the session. And now I am once again delighted to be joined by my guest host, Stuart. Over to you.
Thank you, Eric. I'm delighted to be here as well, and I'm even more delighted that I am introducing Russ Weekly for this presentation. Every time I see Russ present, it gives me joy and wonderment for the amazing things I expect him to say at some point during his presentations. And on that note, Russ is going to give us this presentation around what makes an accessible date picker. Is it even possible? Over to you, Russ.
Thank you. I thought you were going to be more scathing, but wonderful to have a nice intro. Thanks for that. Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I'd like to start with a bit of information, which is you should be prepared for disappointment straight out of the bouquet. I mean, just in general for life, but also for this presentation. So I'm not going to provide you with a beautiful, definitive date picker solution that you can just go out and use in the wild. So if you'd like to get your money back now and burn all the furniture and leave, that's completely acceptable. So what is the point then if I'm not going to give you a solution? Well, what I'm going to do is, the aim of this session is to give you some tools and some strategies to make your job easier so that if you're going out in the wild and choosing a date picker. So it's that idea of, teaching people to fish or shoot fish or even dynamite fish. I'm not sure what the expression is. So that's the aim today. And we're going to cover off a bunch of things. So the first thing we're going to look at is, should you even use a date picker at all? Sometimes the answer is no. We're going to look at a decision tree for some steps you can make when looking for any component before building it. And then we're going to look at conducting user testing or unit testing to determine if the date picker you're interested in is going to be accessible. So that's the aim of today. So why date pickers? Well, date pickers are sort of like the Holy Grail. They're one of the most complicated components to build. So they're a fascinating thing to start with. To me, it's either that or autocomplete drop-downs where there's a lot of complexity going on. So they're really fascinating things to try and tackle, and they're often used by sites, so they're really important as well. Now, this presentation is available. I'm not sure how we can get that out to people, but it's live. So if you want to take that down, it's bit.ly, and you ready? 3S capital X 7EFX. I've got dyslexia, that was terrifying. But if you want to take that down, you can play along with it as we go. Okay, so let's start with this big question. What is a date picker, and is it the best idea for us to do? So let's assume you've got a team and one of your designers, they're obviously a terrible human being, and their immediate thought was, why don't we just use a date picker here? So what's the next step? I like to start with two fundamental questions. And the first one is the date picker solution the perfect solution for the problem you're trying to solve? And in some cases, the answer is actually no. And the other question is the date picker the best solution for your key audiences? So you really need to be very positive in your answer about both of them before deciding to choose something like a date picker. Now, date pickers can be great. They can be really useful in some situations. An example would be, if you're booking flights or booking hotels, a lot of people understand the paradigm of, looking at calendars when they're looking forward and backwards at dates. So in certain cases, for certain people and certain situations, date pickers sort of make sense. But there are times when they're terrifying. I actually recently went to a site and there was a date of birth component there, and they used a date picker and there was no way to type it in. So I had to go back in time to my birth date. Now, you're all probably young spring chickens, but I was born in the year 1920. So I had to go back. I got RSI from going backwards in time just to be able to choose my birth date. So, and that took me like 5 minutes and I was sweating by the end of it. So we really want to avoid, using date pickers for the wrong reason. So bottom line is we've got to be careful not to jump into solution mode and just go, date picker's the best there. But we've also got to be aware of people. And one thing I find interesting is that some people find date pickers really easy to use, and some people find them very challenging. And a lot of my work was actually based on over 20 years sitting beside people, often at their houses or on Zoom more recently, and watching how they interacted with, websites, applications. And I watched a lot of people struggle with date pickers amongst many other components, but especially date pickers that were inaccessible. So in my worldview, I always thought date pickers were the work of Satan. They should be avoided at all costs. However, I had something happen quite recently that sort of shifted my perspective, and I want to share it with you because it might be useful if you're all thinking about this as well. So I'm going to tell you a story about two people. So the first one is Andrew. So Andrew is a friend of mine. He's blind. He's a very, very powerful screen reader user, meaning that he writes JavaScript and everything like that, but he uses JAWS, he uses NVDA, he switches them in and out as he needs, he uses VoiceOver on his phone. Very, very tech savvy screen reader user. He hates date pickers with a passion. What he wants is the ability to come there, type his date, and get the hell out. He doesn't want to have to search around. Now, keep in mind that Andrew's been using the web since the beginning, like myself and probably many others. And so we've been through years of things not working, when things would have keyboard traps and fail to work. So he just wants something that he knows that he can type and get out. So most date pickers are something that he'd want to avoid. But more recently, I got the chance to observe a guy called Dan. Now, Dan's a young man who had a neck injury, so he got no mobility from the neck down. And I was watching him perform some user testing on a client website. And what was going on was he uses facial gestures. So he uses the Mac and basically uses his face to navigate around for the mouse. And then he'll use eye blinks and tongue flicks in order to click and select, etc. So he was filling in a form on a client website, and I watched him put his name in. So for him, it was actually an incredibly laborious process. What he had to do was move his face up to the corner, open the virtual keyboard, and then move gradually through, find the letters of his name, and flick his tongue out each case for that to actually work. Now, have you ever tried to put your password on your TV for Netflix or something like that using the remote control? That's how slow and laborious it was for Dan. And as we moved through the form, we got to a date picker component, and I watched him in split seconds solve this problem. He just clicked on the icon, saw the date in the date calendar, clicked on that. So for him, it was two actions, and the date was back in, already selected and back in. And he actually made the comment, can't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of, I love date pickers, they make it easy. So I'd been living in this world. A lot of my work had been with people with mobility issues, but low vision and no vision. And most people that I'd worked with found that date pickers were terrible. But in 2 seconds, I watched Dan use a date picker and love it because it saved him all this extra effort. So all that's to say, there's no right answer here. Date pickers could be good, they could be bad. It's up to you, but just think carefully before jumping into them. Okay, so what next? So let's just say your team has gone through all that process and they think, yes, a date picker is the best option here. How are you going to build it? And this is where the problems really begin. So what I've done is I've built out a decision tree here, and we'll walk through that and talk about how you could tackle this problem. So here we have our decision tree, which looks incredibly complicated, but I'm going to start right at the top here, and I'm going to talk about terrible engineers. None of you are terrible engineers, but they exist out there, and they use the quick and dirty process. And basically, let's pretend you're a React engineer. You go out and you go, I need a date picker. So you do a Google search and it goes React date pickers, and you go, oh, there's one, and you implement it. Done deal. As long as it works in React, I'm fine. In some cases, they actually do a Google search for React date picker accessible, and they come across one that goes, well, I'm accessible. And they go, does it seem accessible? And yeah, good enough, and go for it. Very rarely do teams actually go, oh my God, we've really got to pull this apart and see that it's accessible. Now, I'm being terrible here, but there are teams that I've worked with that actually have gone through this exact process and quickly implemented something. Now, this is often not the engineer's fault. Often they're in a sprint. They've been told by, terrible POs or IMs, they've got like an effort of one T-shirt to, produce this date picker, and they're on the fly. They've got to move very quickly. But what we want to do is to pull back a little bit and go, how could we do this better? So there's actually 4 sort of steps you can do. And one that I almost cry having to talk about is you should start by asking, is there a native way? Can I build this component using native HTML? Now, I can't believe in 2023, whatever it is, that we're still talking about this. I grew up when the web was starting at 95, and around 2000, 2001, 2003, there was a new movement called the Web Standards Movement. And everyone, designers, developers, everyone understood that semantic and valid HTML was the most important thing. Everything else was secondary. And so every developer and designer, even though we weren't even called that in those days, deeply understood how to build things in HTML. Now, over time, things have become more abstracted, and you've got people now using massive frameworks like React frameworks. And so a lot of developers or engineers are abstracted away from HTML and never look at the markup. And so I've seen teams where they've literally the other day, I was talking to a team who built a list using divs. I've seen people build buttons using divs or tables using divs. So a lot of people now, if in this world, they don't actually care about the output. As long as it functions, they're fine. But ideally, we want to stop and just ask ourselves a question. Whatever we're doing, can it be done natively? And the reason is, if it's being done natively, you get everything almost out of the box for free. Most components are going to be highly accessible if they're native components. So that leaves the question, why would their second box be here saying, is the component accessible or supported? Because if it's native, surely you should just be able to implement it. And generally speaking, the answer is yes. But there are times when you may need to check it. So a great example, I love it, it's called the details element. Beautiful little disclosure widgets, reasonably new, but that's not fully accessible. And if you're ever interested, Adrian Rosselli's got this incredible article diving deep into that. So there are ways to inspect it, and you'll find out that it's not 100% accessible. We've also got the new dialogue window, which allows you to create a dialogue. Now, these are newer components, and they still haven't had that years of robustness. So there are things on the edge that still need to be reviewed. But generally speaking, it is a fantastic way to start. And hopefully you don't even need to go onwards. Now, for a lot of really complex components, they just don't exist in native HTML, in which case you could go to step 2. Now, a lot of people forget this step. You can actually go and look at the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide and see if that component exists already. And there's a whole range of patterns here available. And basically, you can search for a pattern. You might cry a bit. I often do, because I can never find what I'm looking for here. But eventually, you might find something like dialogues, and then dialogue date picker. And then there we go. We've got a version of a date picker, which we're going to look at in a second as well. So there is a possibility that this pattern you're going to build is available. And this crew, I've spent a lot of time trying to make them accessible. Now, these are not the be all and end all, but they're a really good starting point because you're a long way towards being accessible. But still, I would always say, test it. I don't trust anyone. And then you can go for it. Okay, now we're down to step 3. This is where people normally come in. We've got back to the off-the-shelf solution. And this is where you could decide, is that component accessible, and go for it. And now we're at probably the most contentious part, which is, what happens if it's an off-the-shelf product and it's not accessible and you want to modify it? You now got to decide, are you going to fork off from someone else's repository or something like this? So imagine a developer who's looked at material design, for example, and the date picker is not 100% accessible. So they've got to decide, are we going to stay with material or fork off and build our, like a modified version? And in some cases, you may end up with step 4, which is just to build your own. Now, when you're building your own, you should always be standing on the shoulders of giants, or whatever the phrase is. So you can look at, aspects of native, look at what's going on in the APG. You could look at the off-the-shelf versions and still end up building your own. But the whole point of this is really just to say that ideally, we just shouldn't jump into, grabbing something off the shelf and running with it. just think about, native, think about the APG site, and then make a more educated decision. Okay, so that's enough of that. So we're going to look at 3 different date pickers here. The first one is a native date picker using the HTML, and I'll show you that in a second. The second one is the APG one we just looked at. And the third one is I've just pulled one from a website. It's quite a nice one, but it's the equivalent of an off-the-shelf one. So let's have a quick look at it. We've got our native date picker here. I'm going to put my glasses on. So here's our date picker. And this one is, if we go and have a look at this and inspect element on it, and look in the accessibility tree, you can see that it has a role of date. And that's coming from, instead of having input type equals text, we've got input type equals date. That's all that's needed. And out of the box, all this beauty flows. So amazing things can happen as soon as you do that. And what you get is a date picker. Now, is it the best date picker? That's up for debate. Do they look different in every browser? Yes, but it does present a date picker. So that's option number 1. The second one is from the Authoring Practices Guide, and this is their version of a date picker here. Again, very different in style. And the third one is from the US Web Design, and we've got our third date picker here. So we're going to pull them all apart in a little bit. The question you're going to ask, though, is how would you test each of these? Because this gets really confronting if you've got one that's native and you've got one that's recommended by, theoretically, by the W3C, and then you've got one by a really reputable source. How do you know which one to use, and how would you test it yourself? Well, this then gets to 2 parts that I want to talk about. The first one is about people, always starting with people, and then about accessibility unit testing. Now, to me, I always want to start with people. And that gives us a lens to be able to look at any component or layout or flow. So generally speaking, I like to start by looking at different groups of people and their needs. And what this means is that you can start to focus in on that group of people and travel through a component or a form or an entire flow with their lens on. And once you're done, then you can move to another group of people. So instead of being sort of bombarded by all the types of accessibility problems, you can focus in on individual groups of people. And what might they be? So generally speaking, there are a bunch of them that are very common. Now, I've got 5 here, but you could break them up into any way that you'd like. In this particular case, we've got people with some sort of cognitive impairment or neurodivergency. Now, in many cases, I've split them off into 2 groups. It's entirely up to you. We've got people with some sort of color vision deficiency. We've got people with low vision. We've got people with limited mobility, and we've got people with limited or no sight. So they're going to be our 5 groups. And as I said, these are arbitrary. You could choose your own. So let's start with the first group. What do they need from a date picker? Well, we need to make sure of at least 3 things for this broad category. And keep in mind, we are talking about an incredibly broad category here. The first one is the purpose of the component is clear. Now, this sounds so obvious, but it's terrifying. I get to interact with lots and lots of teams from around the world. And one of the things that kind of stuns me, and this is all designers' fault, yet again, is when designers go wild and they create the most amazing, complex, interactive component or layout that you could ever imagine. Sometimes they're comparison charts or filter tools, and to them, it makes perfect sense. But sometimes I hit them on a page and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And it's actually has to be explained to me. And I go, oh my God, I had no idea that was what that was about. Now, if I'm struggling, that's not a good sign. I'm not the most intelligent human being on earth, as you can probably gather, but there's probably going to be a lot of people that will struggle if that component isn't clear in its purpose. The best example I can give you, have you ever tried to do IT support for your parents? Now that's a lesson in being, keeping your emotions in check. Now, your parents might be super tech savvy. Mine are in their 80s and 90s, so they're way beyond the bounds of, using the web on a daily basis. So I could guarantee that if they came to a date picker, it would be the first time they'd ever used it and would probably deeply struggle to understand it. So we need to make sure that the purpose is very clear. For all these groups of people, and in fact anyone, We want to make sure that the content is written in plain language. And we want to make sure that if there's instructions or error messages, those are also very clear. So that's group one. Group two, people with some sort of color deficiency, their need is very simple. We just need to make sure, date pick or whatever we're building, all aspects of that component have sufficient color contrast. And we'll look at that a bit later. Group number three is people with low vision. We need to make sure that the text and layout are understandable if the user has to have them scaled, and that could be with user settings or extensions. We need to make sure that the page works if they've got a tool which is magnifying aspects of the page, and we want to make sure that the layout works if they've inverted their colors, which they often do, like yellow text on a black background or low contrast mode, in order to work for their low vision. Group number four is people with limited mobility. So in terms of date pickers, we just want to make sure that the component is accessible completely with keyboard only or with voice control. And we need to make sure that focus states are clearly visible throughout the process. And we need to make sure that focus orders are intuitive. Now, a lot of people think, is that even necessary when you're building a component? The answer is yes. Anything that we're building, whether it's a small component or a very complex component, we need to track how focus moves and make sure that meets the needs of the user. I was working on a chat window recently, and the focus order was so jarring that a lot of people were surprised by it. What ended up happening was that focus shifted to the top or the bottom very quickly. So even on simple things like date pickers and chat windows, we need to make sure that focus order is intuitive for everyone. If it's not, someone might be looking in the wrong area of the screen and not realize focus has shifted below. And then we've got group number five, people with limited or no sight. So for these sort of people, we need to make sure that the component itself, but also any other interactive elements inside that component, they could be buttons or little instructions, they all need a meaningful, accessible name so that when assistive technologies arrive at that component or that interactive element, that information is announced to them. We need to make sure that all possible states and values are announced and available to users. And if you're going to be injecting anything dynamic into the widget, we need to make sure that that content is announced, but at the appropriate time. Okay, so there are 5 groups of people, again, arbitrary groups. Then the question becomes, which order should we test them in? We'll write our test for it. I always start with the first group. And again, as I said, these might be 2 separate groups, but I'd always start with people with some sort of cognitive disability and the neurodiverse groups. And I'd be asking the simple question is, like we saw a minute ago, can they use it and understand it? Now, if you fail here, meaning that they start to be unable to interact with your component, you failed at such a fundamental level. There's no point in going and looking at color contrast or how it works in a keyboard or how it works in a screen reader. You should stop there because generally speaking, it means you've got either a fundamental UX problem or a content related problem. And that should be addressed straight away because otherwise you're polluting other results. Other people are going to experience that problem. So try and solve the very core user experience and content related problems before looking at anything else. Then I'd go to the next layer down, which is the design layer, the skin, and make sure that it works for people with color contrast issues and low vision so that it can zoom and flow accordingly. And only then, once all those are done, dive to the next level down, the technology layer, and make sure that things work with keyboard, that they work for screen readers, etc. But the thing I've seen people often do is they go, oh, we need to test it. And they'll jump straight into screen reader testing and forget that a lot of things should happen first. If nothing else, you should be testing for people with limited mobility before people with no sight, because most of these are going to be keyboard only users. And if it doesn't work here, it's not going to work for a screen reader because screen reader users are also keyboard only users. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so once we've got all these broad concepts, we can use them to create a really comprehensive set of accessibility unit tests. Now, some people may be familiar what the hell I'm talking about, but if not, I'll give you a bit of an introduction into what that means. But first, a break, commercial break brought to you by water. Highly recommend. $2.95 at your local water depository. Okay, what is accessibility unit testing? So basically, it's not auditing a website. It's about looking at an individual component and trying to work out a process where you can look at the smallest part of that component and look at it individually and independently. And what you want to try and do is look at tiny tests you can look at for that site, for that component. Now, there are two ways we can look at it. The first is how it's presented. So that could be, for example, color contrast. It could also be the name of an aspect to it. So that's how it's presented. It could be presented visually or audibly to someone in a screen reader. But also how users interact with it, the tasks they might be using in order to complete a process, like choose a date or close a window, whatever it might be. So what we need to do is each of these possible concepts and tasks needs to be written out as a test. And each of these tests must be written in such a way that it's a pass or a fail, a rigidly written rule, so that you don't have ambiguity when you write that. So I think the next step is to go and look at some unit testings. So what we're going to do now is look at an example. And this is just a subset of some tests. It's really just a short one that I can talk you through. And just to keep in mind, you would need to do, I'm going to show you a Google chart in a second, but you would need to do this chart for each date picker you're doing. And in this example, I'm just doing desktop only, just because, we don't have, 6 years to go through this. So on that note, let's go and have a look at our date picker. And I'm going to move that across. So we've got our 3 date pickers, and here is our spreadsheet. Now this will be publicly available. I can post it straight after the event. But here we go. On our first thing, we've got 5 sheets here for the 5 groups of people. So we've got people with some sort of cognitive impairment. We've got color deficiencies, low vision, limited mobility, and limited or no sight. Now you'll see for the first 3, we've just got a result, which would literally just be pass or fail in each of these. That's what you want to achieve, and a comment if needed. And that's going to be the same for the first 3. But once we get to the 4th one, because now we're testing things like keystrokes, we need to make sure that it works across other devices. So suddenly, instead of just being a result column, we've got a wide range of devices that we might need to test. When we get to the 5th one, it goes wild. You don't have to do this, but when I'm testing, I test across a range of operating systems and screen reader options and different browsers. So these are the common 9 I would choose, plus a range of mobile ones as well. And so you're going to have lots and lots of columns here. So needless to say, this is not something you want to take lightly. But here's the thing. Some of you are probably sitting there already going, my God, this is wild. You're insane and you're possibly on crack. And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. But more importantly, this is really important if you're going to be adding something to a design system. If you're going to take something and put it on a small page away from everything else, you probably don't need to make this rigorous testing process. But if you're going to put it into a design system and then say that's going to be robust and allow it to go out into the wild and be used by everyone, you probably need to really make sure that that component is highly accessible. Okay, so let's go back to the first one. We'll have a quick look and roll through them. So what we've got here is our 3 date pickers. And the first question is, does it use plain language? Now, this is a very simple one for all 3. They're all fine. We've got, does the date picker provide information on how to write the correct date format? Now, the first one I'll come back to. The second and third have a nice hint there. The first one is relying on the equivalent of like a placeholder, but it's actually the way that the date input works. But that is not ideal, because if we look in Safari, I'm just going to show you, Safari has a weird version of this. And what it does is it actually puts the current date in there. Now, you're probably thinking, why is that a problem? Imagine if this was the 9th of the 9th, 2023, and you wanted to put a different date in. There are some people in one country that write dates differently from everyone in the world. They're a small country. You may not have heard of them. I think they're called USA. Anyway, they unfortunately do numbers the wrong way around. We all agree. We all know it. We just haven't told you yet, but you do date formats the wrong way around. So you might not know that you're doing it incorrectly because there's no hint there. So we just should make sure that there's information there for them. I think I've insulted everyone on the planet by now. The last thing we need to check for this group of people is that if there's a required field, that it's actually flagged. Now, I don't know whether anyone else has noted this, but there's a terrible trend going on in the world now. I see it a lot, where designers and engineers think it's completely acceptable to let a user travel through a form without telling them it's required and submit it and then go, that was required, sucks to be you. So we should flag it's required before they have to get in there. So we want to make sure, is this field visually flagged as required? Okay, next up we have, is all the color contrast working? Text and background, input and background, icon and background, and these all look fine. So that's a simple one. The next up we have is quite an interesting one. You should be making sure that this component works when scaled. So I often run 2 to 3 quick tests. The first one is just a very simple one that I'm sure a lot of you do, just zoom it to 400. Does it work? Now, it also tells us if it's responsive. Now, because these are all sitting on a page, they all probably work quite well. But the next test is more important. So yeah, all that look fine. The next test is just text alone. Now, a lot of engineers forget this, but some people have settings where the text only gets increased. And so if we increase the text, say to 200%, what does it look like? We go to the second one. This is just a little Chrome extension, by the way. Yep, that's looking fine. This is actually a test, by the way, that tells you whether engineers understand about height. Because as you can see here, even though we're looking down here, what you want to be looking for is if developers have forgotten that reflow happens down as well. So you should be building components that don't have height attached to them because some users are going to come in with strange settings. Okay, so that's a quick way to test some of the basics for these first two. But the third one to me is even more interesting because I've actually seen this happen in the real world. I was watching a ZoomText user and they were missing something that was over to the right of the screen. Now this icon's very close. This icon is not too far away, but this one is a long way over to the right. Now imagine if you could only see part of the screen and it existed just in this small area. You may not ever see that icon because it's too far away. I've literally seen a ZoomText user miss important buttons over to the right because they were just too far off screen. So just making sure that the component doesn't have any critical information over to the right. Okay, what's next? Next we go to 4. Okay, so on number 4, we have, this is all about mobility. So let's go and have a look here. I just lost my chat window. There we go. So this one has some overall ones and some tasks. So overall, we need to make sure that focus is clearly visible. We talked about that earlier, and they all have good color focus. We also need to make sure that focus order is intuitive, which we'll talk about soon. Now, I'm going to quickly roll through a bunch of these, but basically we need to make sure the form can receive focus and a date can be added manually. This one is the one that I put that in red because this is a massive problem for me. I would probably be really reluctant to use a date picker if the users couldn't fill that in themselves. And in this case, all 3 can. The date picker icon should be able to receive focus. Now, here's the weird thing. In Chrome on Mac, oh my God, it got to work yet. Like literally 10 minutes ago, that wasn't receiving focus. So sometimes it does and doesn't. You should be able to trigger the date picker via Enter or Spacebar, which is cool. Most of them have that. When the date picker is triggered, focus should move to a date. So if we do get to this and trigger it, it gets to a date, which is good. And this got to a date straight away. Now, this is the most common method now. So rather than fight it, in the old days, I used to send focus to the date picker container. These days, just send them into the date picker onto the right date and test it to make sure your users accept that. But that is the common paradigm now. We also need to make sure that users can travel using arrows only, not only up and down, but also into next month. And all of them do that quite well. So this is traveling month by month. And all of them do that. So that beats off those, I'll just say that aloud. That also fixes them. Okay, we need to make sure that the overlay can close, the overlay closes when you choose a date and you can enter it. So if I go in here and choose a date, if I choose a date, the date gets injected and gets closed. But here's something that to me is probably the biggest problem I've seen in date pickers. When you choose a date, you want the date picker to close, you want the date to be injected back in the input, and the most important thing, you want focus to go to the input, not to the icon. Why would that be? So this one does it badly, just a small bad problem. So if I reload on this page and come in, hit that, and I choose a date, it injects a date, but you'll see focus is actually on the date picker. So as a screen reader coming into that, I wouldn't hear anything. So I've just chosen a date and it's throwing me back to the date picker and will tell me the date picker accessible name again. I don't know whether my date's been added successfully. You need to send focus back to the input so that it can be announced. Now, the third one does this much better. You come in, you hit the date, you choose a date, and it goes back to the input. So to me, that's a super important thing. That's all fine. All of them close with the escape key if you want. Now, here's the weird thing. When you close with the escape key, I'm actually less worried there. With the escape key, you could send them back to the input or back to the icon. That's a different ball game because you've just chosen to bail. Different ones do different things. In this case, if I escape, it goes back to the icon. Same with this one, I think. But the third one goes back to the input. And again, that I'm less worried about. But the one above is the one that's really important. Okay, you should be able to tab around a mouse. I'm just going to move on quickly because I'm worried about time. Okay, for our last group of people, the people with screen readers, we need to make sure that if the icon, there's something missing. Okay, here we go. The form control has a meaningful name. So we just need to make sure that the label is present and creates an accessible name. If users are required to fill in the form, is it programmatically defined as required using the Boolean required attribute? If date picker is present, it doesn't have a meaningful name. So the icon itself. So we need to make sure that when they're announced, they actually have an accessible name. So if we hit this with a screen reader, is it going to be very loud? Or not at all? One or the other.
VoiceOver on Chrome. 1611 2000. Show date picker. Menu pop-up button.
Show date picker. Menu pop-up button.
Code pen. Leaving code pen. Change date. Thursday, September 28th, 2023. Button.
That's telling us change date. It's also telling us the current date, which is interesting.
Leaving code pen. ARIA all the 09 toggle calendar. Menu pop-up button.
So all three of them give an accessible name. Now you need to work out what you want. Like, is it toggle calendar? Is it choose a date?
VoiceOver off.
Make sure there is an accessible name there. This one is an interesting one. When users navigate via date, each date is announced. So let's go in and we'll do it again.
VoiceOver on Chrome. 11 2000. Show date picker. Thursday, the 16th of November, 2020. Thursday, the 23rd of November, 2023. Thursday, the 30th of November, 2023. 30. 4 of 7.
So that's quite good. It's actually telling us the day, the date, and the month. That's really nice. So if we go into
change
the
date.
second one,
Thursday, September 28th. 9 change choose date. Dialog with 8 items. 28 September 2023. Table 7 14 7 13.
So this one is a little bit patchy and it just says the number 13. I actually kind of like it giving a little bit more information. Like, I don't think you need the day, but I really want the date and the month. In some ways, I prefer it all, like Thursday, the 30th of September or whatever it is. Now, the third one,
toggle calendar, menu pop, 09 toggle calendar, menu pop, navigate back 1 year and 46 more items, dialog the 13th of September, 2023, Wednesday, button.
Okay, if I move to a different date, listen to everything that gets loaded up.
Navigate back 1 year and 46 more items, dialog the 12th of September, 2023, Tuesday, button. Navigate back 1 year and 46 more items, dialog the 11th of September, 2023, Monday, button. VoiceOver
so
off.
That's a little bit of extra, like far too much info. Now, keep in mind, I'm just doing really rough testing in one screen reader right now, and you're going to get different results in different screen readers, but that's just an indication for you of things to look out for. What else are we going to look at? They've got accessible names. When the date field is closed, input. This is what I was telling you about before. This is also for this group of people. We need to make sure that focus returns to the input and the date is announced. Okay, so that's a quick overview of how you can actually unit test a component. If you want to be slightly insane like myself, you have no social life, but then you get a really cohesive answer about which ones are accessible. And then you can make a decision based on that, based on all the passes and fails that you might be seeing. Okay, so very quickly, what happened here? So I'm going to talk a little bit of high level, but I want you to understand that this is not meant to shame any of these ones here. It's just for educational purposes. So the native solution, it's very easy to implement. No JavaScript, even I could do it. So that's good. But it does have some issues. In Safari, the date is presented as a hint. That could be confusing. And it gives no date picker at all. If we look here, there's actually no date picker icon at all. Chrome doesn't always allow focus to go to that. Now, I literally had it this morning, as I said, where focus couldn't go there. So it depends on the day, I think, and the weather. Might be based on humidity. Screen readers, focus is not sent back to the input, so it's not announced. And Safari just announces each of these as group, which is not great. So, okay, now you would need to rigorously test this, but you can see there's some problems there. The APG one, it's a little ugly. I mean, I think we can all agree that's not the prettiest date picker on earth. Who am I to judge, though? I mean, look at me. But generally speaking, it's not the prettiest one on earth. But again, focus is not sent back to the import, so it's, that date's not being announced. And then we've got the one from the US web design system. This one's a lot better. The only thing I'd be worried about, now I'm only looking in Safari, VoiceOver at the moment, but a lot of additional information is being announced when it goes through each of those dates. So as you can see, if we look overall, all three options have strengths and weaknesses. So there's no perfect solution. So the bottom line is, you can use these sort of frameworks, but test yourself. Don't even trust me. I wouldn't trust me. Have a look at it, try and do rigorous testing yourself, test with at least one or two different screen readers on different platforms, so at least you get a better sense of what's going on. And finally, the last thing I want to just talk about is also watch people. Most of my career has been sitting beside people, and that's where you get the most amazing insights. Rigorous testing like this is great. It's really powerful, really useful, but nothing beats sitting and watching real people interacting with their technology. The stories I have about people with Zoom text or screen readers that have failed are because I've actually seen them experiencing this sort of world. So people with lived experience are really important, because what that means is you're going to inevitably be able to build a better and more inclusive product. So that's it for me. I don't know whether you're all exhausted. I'm exhausted. We've been on a journey through light and sound. So on this point, I think we stop for questions. If anyone's even watching. Stuart, Eric, what's the plan?
What is the plan? Well,
and I'd just like to, again, to advertise water.
I was enjoying the fizzy version of it myself earlier. And,
I had two ad breaks in there. I hope that's okay for your YouTube.
Yeah, we get residuals.
Remuneration.
So,
yeah. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't water either.
Were there any questions? Were people sound asleep? I gather there was just some hatred and.
Eric, shall I kick off first with the question I've got?
Actually, we just had a question come in on YouTube from Danielle Favreau. I'd be curious.
Hey, Danielle.
I'd be curious what Russ's thoughts are on a date range picker, 2 separate fields, 1 field, and date of birth. Should it be a drop down for a month and then a day and a manual enter year? What's the best option?
Oh, there's 2 really good questions in there. Am I still sharing? I'm not even going to do this live. I'm going to try and answer the second one first. I'm just going to quickly go to my repos because I have a date picker one that I would prefer if I had to use it. And there are 2 ways you could probably tackle a problem. I did this for a site a while ago. And again, all these links I can share later on. If we look at the second example, the first example is basically the same thing. But what I've done is used a beautiful field set and legend, and then a bunch of labels attached to inputs. So they've all got beautiful accessible names. And then I'm just hiding those labels off screen. And so what you get left with is date of birth and just 3 fields. And so you can literally just type in 21st, 09, of 2023. So I kind of like that one. But I've also worked on ones where there's just simple drop downs. But I like the ones with 3 drop downs personally. I don't know whether to answer your second question, but your first question, I would definitely do them as 2 concepts. I worked on a really complex site for an insurance product. We were trying to choose date ranges, and it was really complicated to get like a grader, even just for, sighted users. It was really complicated to try and work out a visual metaphor that worked for them and try to get them to understand they had to click once for this and shift and get click. It was really, really complicated. So we end up breaking into 2 concepts. This is your start date and this is your end date. Now, it won't work in every case. It will work for booking, like flights and accommodation. For car crashes and booking in mechanics, that's a harder one. I don't know whether I answered your question, but feel free to get your money back from the 2 compares. I'm sure they'll give you your ticket back if that wasn't relevant.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, we will
It's an
refund
honor.
you 2 1,000ths of a cent for the upsell for water.
Is that it? Are we done?
Nah, Russ, I've got one question for you, which is, I think, probably the most important question we've got here, which, considering you're born in 1920, what are you doing in life to look so young and sprightly?
I don't know who said that, but it's all a lie. At this point, I'd like to advertise my moisturizing. No, I'm old though. I think Stuart's not as old as me, but we've definitely been around for a while. Anyone that's been like most answer in chat. Is anyone in the web in 95? I don't know whether people can answer in YouTube, but that's when I began. So I'm very, very, very old. Some people began in 93. So that's even wilder.
And
But
we've
no
heard back from
moisturizing.
and we've heard back from Danielle, and she thanks you that
She wants
you
her money
have
back?
answered her question. No, she was happy with the answer. So you fooled her like you fooled most people. Just like I think you've insulted every single possible role in the software development lifecycle and most nationalities, including yourself in this presentation, which I thought was, pretty impressive for us.
I think we'd all agree, without opening a can of worms here, America's wrong about the date format though, isn't it? Can we all agree with that? Am I wrong?
As
I'm in favor of that as well. I agree with you on that one, Russ.
as an American, we do dates real weird. One of the numbers can go before the other number and still make sense, and one of them cannot.
Along with not embracing the metric system. I mean, seriously, why do they make things so hard?
Attempts were made.
Cool. Well, thanks for everyone for coming along. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. And now with a little outro spiel. Again, thank you again for tuning in. And Russ, thank you for a tour de force on a very complicated yet a very vital component. For those of you watching live or who are watching a recording of this talk, if you enjoyed this session, you can hit that like button. You can also subscribe to this channel. And the channel's page is available at youtube.com/inclusive design, one word, and then the numbers 24, inclusive design 24. It'll keep you up in the loop for future events as well as uploads for the recordings for the rest of this session. Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks from our supporters, Google, Intopia, Barrier Break, Tetralogical, Intuit, Infoaxia, and the Law Office of Lainey Feingold. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back at the top of the hour with our next session. Hope to see you all there.